Imagined Memories by Grace Hill. Memory, imagination. How do we know what is true and what is fantasy? How do we interpret what actually happened versus what we assume to have happened? Roland Barthes stated that what the photograph reproduces to infinity has occurred only once. The photograph mechanically repeats what could never be repeated existentially. In this, the photograph itself is not a memory. It is simply a documentation of a moment, capturing a split second. We use this moment to encourage remembrance, but how accurate is the memory we recall? Is this merely imagination? These photographs document memories involving a younger version of myself. However, I don't remember these times. Without these images, they may have slipped from my consciousness, never to be recalled again. The only evidence I have in understanding what these memories are the visual clues in the photograph. For example, I must have been at the beach because there are sandcastles and I am wearing a wetsuit. At what point, however, do I start to imagine these details? Looking at these photographs, my mind begins to tell me stories, using these visual clues to construct a narrative in my mind of what might have been going on. By having the photograph as my only evidence of this time, how am I able to trust what my mind tells me? Am I simply imagining a false memory? To better understand the link between memory and imagination, and the role that photography plays, we must first understand what memory is, and what imagination is. What is happening in the brain when we remember, and when we imagine. Michael Greshko suggests that everything we know is a memory. Each name, telephone number, and address that we recall are stored in the brain as a memory. But what encourages the brain to recall? Greshko discusses how memories are held within groups of neurons, which fire as a group in response to certain stimuli. This stimulus could be your friend's face or the smell of freshly baked bread. This infers that it is our senses that inform memory. The sights, sounds, smells, noises, and tastes that we experience trigger a memory. We remember times in which we have experienced these things before. In relation to photography, this is significant, as when looking at a photograph, we are reliant on our senses, our sight. The brain uses these visual clues within the image to evoke a memory and build up a narrative. However, we will experience these details outside of this photograph. Referring to my earlier example, this will not be the only time that I visited the beach, built a sandcastle, or even worn a wetsuit. Our brains may take the memories from other times we remember more clearly to construct a narrative, remembering a constructed or imagined memory. With the line between imagination and memory being so thin, it's important that we define and differentiate the two. Dr. Jim Davis defines imagination as something that allows us to explore ideas of things that are not in our present environment, or perhaps not even real. But how is it that we're able to picture things we have never experienced? How can we create something entirely new using only our minds? Davis goes on to explain one takes information from the outside world, such as light or sound waves, and finds meaning in it, using memory and perceptual processes. In imagination, it works in reverse. Imagery is created from the memory. This is not dissimilar to how our brains encounter memory. In the same way our senses inform memories, our memories inform imagination. The brain takes the things we experience through our senses and stores them as a memory. Having these details stored in the brain, we can then use this information to construct something new, something imaginary. This makes it more difficult for our brains to differentiate when experiencing media like a photograph. How can we be sure that the meaning we derive from an image is truly real, something that we remember happening and not something we have interpreted incorrectly and quite literally made up? In this sense, then, how far can we rely on a photograph to deliver memory? It seems that the meaning we gain from an image is simply an accumulation of multiple memories, all working together to construct one coherent and understandable narrative, a narrative that is imagined. As a result of this close relationship, there are limitations in solely using photographs to help recall memories. A recurring argument in research is that with a still image, we cannot see the context in which the photograph was taken, what was happening in the moments before and after the trigger was released. This one moment in time is not enough to create a memory itself. So what is it we remember when we see a photograph? What are the limitations of using images to inform memory? Researchers argue that without knowing the context behind a photograph, it is difficult to accurately derive meaning and truly understand the memory. Michelle Boger argues that memories are inherently unreliable records. We use photographs to prod our memories of events. But how can we be sure that memories prodded from a photograph are not a falsehood? The photograph shows only a split second, We would need more information, a greater understanding of context, to fully understand the information prodded by the photograph. Berger goes on to highlight how, at the time the photograph was taken, it meant something to the viewer, and now have been literally torn from their original context, inferring that when we see a photograph outside of its context, it loses meaning, suggesting that memory cannot be derived from an image unless it's seen in its original context, during the event itself. This suggests that the second the image is taken, meaning is lost, and the memories and understanding we take from photographs are tainted by falsehoods. Other researchers explore how the physical making of an image can alter the meaning we take from it. Elizabeth Edwards explores survey photography and discusses how, though these photographers were intending to preserve the past, they focused more on creating a record of the materials used than the subject matter itself. She suggests it was through these debates about the quality of things and about the appropriateness of photographic processes that historical desires built around recovery, preservation, and the future were played out. This highlights that though we may interpret a photograph in one way, our judgments could be completely wrong. We can only infer meaning from what we see in front of us. The making of an image could change this. We assume photographs are made to remember, but as Edwards points out, they could have been made for a number of reasons, trying to derive meaning from an image that was not made to hold memory. In doing this, we are imagining something that is simply not there, creating a narrative that never existed. Glenn Williamson references the family archive, how we choose to display images. He suggests that we treat photographs in certain ways depending on the attachments we have to them. For instance, the framing of the photograph is intensely personal and replete with memory. In my mind, this creates a vivid image of caring for the photograph as if it were a loved one itself, suggesting that the photographs we display are the ones documenting our most fond times, or that present ourselves in a positive light. However, what happens to the other photographs we take? Williamson describes that most of these individual images are filed away and eventually lost. Photographs that we see as less meaningful are treated with no such reverence. They get hidden away. We neglect the importance of these photographs. In neglecting these photographs, we only see half of the story, leaving our minds to imagine the rest. The limitations of gaining memory from photographs inspires the question of whether imagination aids our interpretation of the image. At what point does our understanding of a photograph cross over from an actual memory to an imagination of what might have been happening? A notable example of imagination impacting our understanding of a photograph is the case of the Cottingley fairies. In 1917, two cousins staged a series of photographs that supposedly acted as proof that fairies existed. In the images, the girls were sitting in their garden, playing with little winged creatures. When the photographs started to gain public attraction, they maintained that these were real photographs, which erupted a great debate amongst the public. A debate not dissimilar from the questions I now ask. Whether these photographs documented a true happening, or whether they were constructions, a bringing to life of the girls' imaginations. It wasn't until the 1980s that they confessed that they had constructed the images. The fairies were cuttings out from a book, with wings drawn on. These photographs fooled many people, speaking volumes to the way that photographs can rewrite our understanding of reality. We take the visual clues within a photograph as truth, and use them to construct narratives. People would have seen the Cottingley fairy photographs and taken them as truth, the image acting as a documentation and as proof. In the same way, we often take the photographs in the family album as truth, due to the visual clues. Like with the Cottingley fairies, we don't always know the context in which the photographs were made, and so must construct our own narratives to develop meaning. We use our imaginations, informed by visual imagery, to do this. In addition, Richard Llewellyn MacDonald discusses how imagination can inform the understanding of an image. He uses the example of the Salford Past Facebook page, through which people who lived in Salford in the post-war era share photographs of the time. MacDonald draws attention to the way that the conversations that converge around these digitised photographs unfold over extended durations. Exchanges of memories lasting days, weeks, and months are stimulated by a single photograph. This frames the photograph as a jumping-off point for both memory and imagination. In reference again to this idea of visual clues, MacDonald suggests that the members of the group that themselves lacked a single photograph from which to construct a mental picture were able to use the family archives of strangers to construct narratives surrounding their own pasts, using visual clues in the images to add substance to their own memories. The memories they do have are added to or altered by the photographs shared in the group, memory and imagination working in tandem to create one solid memory. But are these memories accurate? Group members become stuck in a conflict between the memory that they remember as the truth, or whether the photographs that they see are the truth. Perhaps seeing the photographic memories from others alter an individual's memories, assuming another's as their own, creating a collective memory that is an imagined version of the truth. Photographic evidence of a time may still warp memory, and even inspire imagination to take over. When I started to explore the work within this genre, there seemed to be a significant divide, work focusing on either memory or imagination, never a marrying together of the two. As a result, I broadened the themes of my inquiry, looking more widely at the family album and construction. I found photographer Trish Morrissey's work to be particularly informative in the production of my own work, as she specifically explored themes of construction with the family album. Morrissey infiltrates family photographs, swapping places with a member of the family she is working with, assuming their role before constructing a family photograph, seemingly a candid snap of a very ordinary group visiting the beach. It's only when we look closer into the work as a whole that we see that everything is not as it seems. The same woman appears in each photograph. I think that the performative nature of the work is particularly fascinating. What Morrissey captures is not real, although it would seem as though it was. She performs a narrative, asking the viewer to believe in the situation she presents. This leads us to question whether the photographs that we take and hold with reverence are a true representation of events, or do we perform, perhaps unintentionally, to be viewed in a specific way, which in turn warps the memories that we do have. Cindy Sherman also works with this recurring theme of construction, creating self-portraits in which she assumes the stereotypes that were cast on women in film in the 1950s and 60s. Rather than taking on the role of a specific character, Sherman plays with stereotypes, imagining her own characters, giving a voice to the women that played these roles without one. The stereotypes Sherman uses have been used countless times within the media, but it's unusual for them to be brought to the forefront, the centre of the viewer's attention. This arouses a sense of familiarity in the work. It feels as though we have met these characters before, although they are simply imaginations. This photograph is a copy without an original. This method of working invites the viewer to wander within the frame and construct the narratives that are implied by the photographs. This infers that the viewer is actively encouraged to imagine what is going on in the frame. Sherman encourages the viewer to use the visual clues she provides to imagine what is happening in the composition, to construct the narrative. I find it fascinating how Sherman is able to create meaning in this way, and this is similar to the way that I have been working practically, constructing images that are heavily reliant on utilising these visual clues to craft meaning and influence and alter the way in which memories are understood. After investigating this field of inquiry, I used the research I was carrying out to inform a physical body of work, a series of photographs and moving image entitled Imagined Memories. Throughout my research, I have been continually exploring the limitations of memory and the influence that imagination has on the interpretation of an image. In my creative work, I wanted to physically translate this. I made work that took the memories of others and warped them with the influence of my own imagination. As Juliet Hacking had commented, creating a copy without an original. Using visual clues as a point of communication with the viewer, I set up performative tableau, reinterpreting and inserting myself into the memories of others. I exaggerated the narrative, creating a hyperbolic manipulation of events. Each detail was purposefully placed in the composition, alluding to how even though the scene was clearly shot in the home environment, there is something not quite right. The work feels staged. I ask the viewer to question the reality they see, selling a falsehood as truth. These visual clues hint towards a truth in the work, whilst the context in which they take place suggests fantasy. The viewer cannot see the context in which the work was made, so asked to develop their own meaning and draw conclusions from the memories that they are seeing. Working with both still and moving image to construct these narratives, the work is a physical manifestation of the conflicts of memory and imagination in photography, showing the viewer how the memories we derive from photographs are falsehoods, shooting imagined memories and presenting them as reality. Developing a deeper understanding of this relationship between memory and imagination and the role photography plays massively impacted how I made work. My work aims to highlight the limitation of using imagery to restore memory and influence that our imaginations have on understanding an image. After exhibiting the work, it was fascinating to see this happening in real life, a reaction triggered by the work I had made. People were using the visual clues within my work to spark memories of their own childhoods, despite the fact that my work documented imagination, playing into this idea of a collective memory. What I have learned from exploring this field of inquiry is that memory and imagination cannot and never will be separated. One must always influence the other. Without our memories, we would not be able to inform our imaginations. Without our imagination, we would never be able to reconstruct a memory within our minds. They are forever entwined. So, can there ever be such thing as a true memory?